Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and before we get started on tonight's story, I'm going to let you know a bit more about tonight's author. Mr. Outlaw has a new novel that's currently out, and if you guys have loved Mr. Outlaw, and I don't mean just tonight's story, I mean like his stories for the past few years and the overarching building universe that he seems to have across these multiple dimensions, then you're going to love Trigon by Hugh Liu. One day, a massive black pyramid suddenly appears in the Atlantic, drawing military forces into a vicious siege against inexplicable horrors. As a dwindling team of elite soldiers ventures into its strange halls, they discover a threat that defies their understanding of the universe. A link to Trigon will be in the description down below, and I strongly suggest you check it out. It's only $2.99 on Kindle, and it helps support the author. And now, on to tonight's story. We decided to go up to the third floor. Not sure what we were hoping to find, but where else could we go? The third floor consisted mostly of smaller classrooms, an administrative office, a small student pub tucked away in one of the corners. We headed for the pub, breathing simultaneous sighs of relief once we found it empty. I sat at the bar while Rachel went behind it and began pouring up 2 rum and cokes, both with more rum than coke. She sat next to me, finished the drink in one gulp, and then buried her face in her hands. She asked me if I thought Amira was right, if we really were in hell. I sipped my drink and told her that I didn't, but that I also didn't have an explanation for what this could have been, if not hell. That I couldn't even really believe it was happening. That it all felt so surreal. That I wasn't fully convinced that this wasn't a dream. Rachel said that this couldn't have been a dream, so I asked her what she thought it was. After some thinking, she said that maybe all of us had just gotten extremely unlucky, marked to suffer at the hands of some unknowable cosmic force for reasons we were never meant to understand. I nodded and made myself another drink. She looked at me. "Do you think we still have a chance of getting out of here?" she asked. I told her that even if I didn't, I wouldn't have admitted it. That it was better to be optimistically delusional than to give up. She smiled and said that she liked that answer, and that I better not go insane on her or else she'll kill me. I told her likewise, and we grabbed some knives from the cabinet behind the bar and then ventured back out. As we were walking, Rachel asked me if it seemed darker now. I considered this carefully. It was just barely noticeable, but I could tell that it was. And in a strange way, it wasn't as if the lights themselves had dimmed, more so that it was being smothered by something. The air just seemed thicker, heavier, weighed down by some intangible element. We discovered the source of it when we walked over to the atrium and looked down over the railings at the lower floors. At first, it was hard to understand what we were seeing. It looked like the first floor had been completely submerged by a void, just a blanket of sheer gloom extending nearly halfway up to the second floor. Thick, dark spirals drifting up from it like smoke, gradually spreading through the air. But unlike smoke, it felt cold. Slowly, it was becoming harder to breathe, the air growing saturated by this inscrutable stench. Something sharp, pungent, metallic, as if an old medicine cabinet had been doused with blood and then lit on fire. We then noticed that it was rising, getting closer to us, not just the smoke, but the actual darkness itself, as if it were being pumped in from somewhere. It wasn't moving fast, but eventually, it would reach us. We backed away from the railing and then stared at each other, as if the other person might have an answer. Which, of course, neither of us did. The panic hits much harder when time becomes your enemy, when the threat is so ominous but still yet to be defined. But what happened when it reached us? We were determined not to find out. We took some deep breaths and then settled on a purely logical approach. The darkness was moving up towards us, so how could we escape it? By moving up ourselves, Rachel said. I was about to ask her how until I realized where she was going with this. The maintenance room. The hatch. The dirt. Theoretically, it could be a way out, maybe the only way out. I just didn't like it. I wasn't a fan. She asked if I had any other suggestions. I told her I didn't. I tried to come up with something, but my brain was firing blanks. I looked back over the railing. The darkness was still climbing, getting closer, and now I could see something poking up from it. It was a gigantic head connected to a thick, dark, slimy stalk which was connected to God knows what. It hovered in place for a while before turning up to look at us. It was Jason's head, bloated up to about 10 times the size it should have been. His skin had become a painful-looking dark purple, his eyes bloodshot and nearly bulging out of their sockets. His mouth was hanging open, his jaw slack to the point of appearing dislocated. He released this loud and awful croaking noise, something so inhuman that mere exposure to it induced a type of dread I had never felt before. There was something inside his mouth. It looked like a pale spider with the head of a wrinkled old man. He was just crawling around on his tongue, sporadically looking up and grinning. Suddenly, the idea of crawling through dirt didn't seem so bad. I backed away and told Rachel that we needed to get to the maintenance room ASAP. I must have looked pretty terrified because she asked me what I'd seen down there. I told her. She didn't want to know. She decided to look away. Seconds later, we were both running. The maintenance room was all the way on the other end of the building, but if we moved fast, we could get there in just a few minutes. Problem was, we couldn't move very fast. The air had become so thick that we nearly drowned in it. We had to inhale several large mouthfuls just to get enough oxygen to move forward a few steps. And that was another problem. The air itself was so extremely bitter that it was burning our throats and nostrils. The smoke was so heavy that it was hard to keep our eyes open for more than a few seconds before they started to sting like hell. And if all that wasn't enough, the light had been reduced to a fraction of its original brightness. It was hard to tell where we were going at all. But desperation's a pretty powerful force. We were convinced that all we needed to do was reach the maintenance room and we'd be free from this nightmare, and we didn't need to rationalize it. The fear of turning into one of those grotesque, bloated heads was visceral enough to drive us ahead. Of course, it wasn't easy. In fact, I never thought something could be so excruciating. When I fell to my knees with a sharp stinging in my chest, Rachel helped me up. And when it happened to her, I did the same. Before we cleared the atrium, I took one last look over the railing to find that Jason's head had been joined by about a dozen more, all vaguely familiar faces that had been swollen and mutated into some horrendous version of the people they once were. Now the darkness had reached the second floor. By the time that we rounded the corner leading to the maintenance room, we were too compromised to stand. Unable to do much more than crawl, still, we pulled ourselves forward, our lungs aching and eyes burning. We could just barely see the outline of the door, and we were so close. And then we could see nothing at all. Not that it mattered, because we could no longer open our eyes without it feeling like they were being pierced by several hundred needles at once. Now every breath we tried to take seemed to get stuck in our throats, as if the air had turned into concrete. We were forced to hold it. We couldn't have been more than a few feet away, so we just kept crawling, feeling along the wall until we found the door. As we searched for the handle, we could hear that croaking noise echoing off the walls, much louder now, like several voices in unison, ones that sounded dangerously close. My head was flooded with images of those bloated heads floating towards us with their mouths wide open, the spider creatures ready to jump out at us and do who knows the fuck what. We managed to open the door before any of them could reach us, and once we were in, we wasted no time slamming it shut. It was pitch black inside. But now we could breathe. Now we could actually open our eyes. I took my phone and turned the flashlight on, half expecting to find some monstrosity staring down in the darkness. But there was nothing. We were alone. We gave ourselves a breather before looking for the light switch and then flipping it on. There were still traces of the smoke floating around from when we'd opened the door, but not enough for it to be suffocating. It was safe in here, for the time being. We could still hear the croaking through the walls, still getting louder, as if those things knew exactly where we were and had honed in on us. We barricaded the door with whatever miscellaneous shit we could find. A desk, some chairs, some buckets. I'm not sure why we were convinced it would help, but I guess it provided a modicum of comfort. We both took a deep breath and then opened up the hatch. Some clumps of dirt fell through. Now the croaking had turned into a roar. It sounded like it was right outside the door. There was a loud bang. The room shook. One of the walls cracked. We looked at each other. Last chance to back out, but where the hell would we go? We climbed up the ladder and into the dirt. Never in my life had I imagined what crawling through sheer dirt might feel like, but it's hard to understate just how miserable of an experience it was. The weight of the earth crushing you from every angle, cold, damp soil clinging to your skin, your hair, soaking into your clothes, catching mouthfuls of soil as you struggle desperately to climb upwards. Every inch demanding almost every ounce of strength you have to offer. And the entire time we could still hear the croaking from below, feeling the rhythmic force of something pounding up against the ceiling like a drum beat through the dirt. At some point it sounded like something had managed to tear the ceiling apart. We just kept climbing. I lost track of exactly where Rachel was, but I could hear her struggling somewhere close by. I'm not sure how long we crawled for. It must have been a few minutes, but it also could have been an hour. My arms had never felt so heavy. I'd never felt so much strain on my lungs. The stench, the taste of metal, minerals, and earth was overwhelming that I was forced to swallow back puke. Sometimes I'd feel something biting my skin and I'd thrash my limbs until it stopped. But as bad as it got, I never stopped. It wasn't an option. I died from exhaustion before accepting whatever fate awaited us below. It was like ecstasy when I finally saw light. The smell of fresh air was sweet, warm enough to feel like a nice, dry blanket against my cold, wet skin. I pulled the rest of my body up to the surface just as my muscles surrendered for good. I flopped onto the ground, catching my breath, savoring the relief. After a while, I found the energy to sit up. I was in a forest. A strange one. The trees were like skyscrapers. Extremely thick trunks, extremely tall, standing to the sky. The branches were all a zigzag shape, interlacing with each other to form a bizarre but kind of beautiful pattern above. The plants around me were odd but stunning at the same time. Gigantic mushrooms that pulsed with neon light, colorful bushes with gelatinous orbs stuck into them, flowers over 6 feet tall, with tentacle-like protrusions that moved with the breeze. All around me were alien noises coming from hidden creatures. I got the sense that they all were aware of my presence. They just didn't want to be seen. But the place didn't feel dangerous. If anything, it was peaceful. I was too busy being blown away by it all that I'd forgotten about Rachel. She still hadn't made it up. I considered that maybe she'd become disoriented and started crawling in the wrong direction. I tried calling out to her. When I got no response, I began to dig back down. I didn't go far. Soon her head popped up from the dirt. Her face was covered by mud in a few areas where it wasn't. I could see that her skin had become beet red. She was coughing, gagging violently. I crawled over and helped pull her out the rest of the way. She knelt down and violently dry heaved before puking up a mouthful of dirt and vomit. She wiped the dirt away from her face as she gasped for air. I could see tears rolling down her cheeks. Happy tears. She was smiling. But we didn't linger. There was no guarantee that those things wouldn't eventually follow us up, so as soon as we'd recovered enough strength, we chose a direction at random, and we began walking. The soft dirt floor soon gave way to firmer grass, and after a while, we found a man-made path. There was a tree in front of it with what looked like a huge red arrow spray-painted across the trunk, pointing left. We debated with each other about whether or not to follow it. Rachel argued that it could have been a trap. I argued that it was a breadcrumb left by somebody who had been in a similar position to ourselves. We argued for a long time, switching positions every so often until we ultimately decided that our best option was just to follow it. It turned out to be a good decision. It first led us to a creek with water so unadulterated, so crystal clear, that we almost felt bad about using it to wash the dirt from our skin and clothes. There was another message spray-painted into the grass in front of it. Drinkable. The water was cold, smooth going down our throats. It tasted vaguely like honey. Then we continued on the path. Whenever it forked into multiple paths, there was always an arrow painted somewhere to guide us. As we walked, we encountered various different creatures. All of them bore some degree of resemblance to animals and insects we'd seen before, but not fully. Their colors were bright. Their skin and fur far more luminous. Their anatomy more beautifully intricate than anything we were familiar with. A stark contrast from whatever the hell we'd just escaped. We counted 22 arrows before we finally arrived at a small cabin in a clearing. I suppose the best way to describe it was rustic. Small structure, somewhat haphazard in appearance, but strangely inviting at the same time. We walked up to the front door, still somewhat wary about entering. We looked at each other, came to a silent agreement that we may as well, that we've already come so far. We knocked. When nobody answered, we tried the handle. Inside, it smelled like wood, coffee, cigarettes. The place was bare bones save for a small desk. There was somebody sitting up in the chair behind it, sleeping with his face pointed to the ceiling and his mouth wide open. A young man with messy blonde hair wearing a jacket and jeans. A rifle was laid across his lap, one of his fingers still firm on the trigger. One of his hands was bandaged up. On the desk was a collection of paper, pens, notebooks, knives, box of ammunition, a steaming cup. We didn't immediately try to wake him, at the risk of startling the guy and having him pump us full of lead. We didn't have to. Soon an alarm clock went off and he jostled awake. When he saw us, he shrieked, began fumbling around with the rifle for long enough that we could have run over and snatched it away if we really wanted to. But we didn't. Once he'd gotten it steady in his hands, he stood up and pointed at us. We put our hands up. He just stared at us for a while before lowering it, letting out a sigh of relief. "Thank God," he said. "I'm so sorry, it's just nobody's come through for a long fucking time. Wasn't expecting it." And he smiled. "Glad to see you," he said. "I mean, I'm not glad that you're here, but it just gets so lonely sometimes. Nice to talk to somebody." We asked him where the hell we were. He shook his head. Took a long exhale. "I'd be lying if I told you that I understood any of this," he said. "But I'll fill you in on what I can. Just be prepared to listen. It'll take a while." He walked over to a counter at the back of the room, upon which sat a pot of steaming black liquid. He poured out 2 cups of it, and then walked back over, handing one to each of us. "Black coffee with honey, pure grain alcohol," he told us, before sitting back down. "So, first things first, I gotta know. Where were you guys?" I asked him what he meant. I mean, where were you when you became trapped? Where all the crazy shit started. I was in a parking garage, getting ready to leave work. We told him that we were in a university, which seemed to disappoint him. He said that was boring, that somebody named Hansen had been in an abandoned insane asylum on a remote Arctic island, a journalist trying to uncover evidence of clandestine government experiments. To imagine what kind of shit he went through. We asked him who Hansen was. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an ancient-looking carton of cigarettes. He struck a match, lit one of them, took a few drags before answering. Well, he's a survivor. We all are. And now, so are you two. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and we're currently entering fall, which means Halloween is right around the corner. I just want to say thank you guys for watching tonight's video, listening to tonight's episode of the podcast, and to start expecting more audios as we go closer and closer to the spookiest day of the year. Once October starts, you know what that means. I'll be having out a video every single day until Halloween itself, and I expect to see you there. I mean it. I expect to see you there for every video, for every podcast episode, and I expect to see you like, comment, and subscribe, and all that jazz bell, what do you do on podcasts? Follow on Spotify? Yeah, that, for the month of October, and especially so you don't miss the 13-day countdown. Also, I want to give a huge thank you to everybody on this list of Patreons. Some of these amazing folks are Diana Kraus, AcidSystem, Blake Rattler, Brandon Mendoza, Brenna, Caltuna, ChicagoHitman, CoryxKenshin, CrusaderChocobo, Dakota Best, Daniel Poulsen, Dante Kinkade, Enchanted Buns, Estebean, Hades' Nephew, himbojerry, Our Minute Seconds Time, Ingegerd Salstrom, Jay Kearns, Jadis Pet, McMog, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Psychomel, Plant Piz, Red Shadow Cat, Remember the Sun, Salty Surprise, Samar Lynn, Seclude, Simba's Bloody Mojo, Sky Harbor, Smiley the Psychotic, Sully Man, Tully Sue, Team Leo 76, The Demented Voice in Your Head, The Chavez Brothers, The Ginger Bros, Tommy Walters, Viceroy Scorn, William Wellington, Your Bro Keegan, Zabub, and Shadow Gardens. A huge thank you to you guys, everybody who shows up in the description down below, and as always folks, sweet dreams.